Welcome to Surf Industry. We have a fantastic guest today from LA Fins, Larry Allison. How you doing today, Larry?
Unreal. Thank you.
Dude, I'm stoked to have you here because not only have you been making fins since 1971, you've been making them here in the USA. I mean, how does it feel to continue a craft that you love in the country you started surfing in?
Well, it's because I'm a tinkerer. It's hard to actually have someone else do something and then have it not turn out the way you expected. And it's another thing that I'm that type of guy that a lot of times I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd have an idea and I'd be at the shop at 5 in the morning, all of a sudden grinding something and be in the water at 7. But I learned a lot of that from Dewey Weber. Dewey told me at an early age. I remember when I was 17, I learned to drive and I'd see Dewey and Hap and guys like that in South Bay. That Dewey says he was actually taking a rudder fin and he was modifying it. And at that time in the early 70s, I was hired actually to cut out fins with a jigsaw because the older guys didn't have the patience to cut fins out of the jigsaw because a bandsaw was a rarity at that point. And so I, being a shop class guy, because you know how guys are, we're in shop class and we just want to go to the beach. I had A period gym. If my teacher knew that I wasn't at A period, he knew the surf was good. So it was a good gig even as a teenager. But Dewey taught me that what you do with the glass on, because if you didn't have a fin, is he would actually surf the board, come out of the water, to have a grinder at the shop, change the fin, go back and surf that same board, same fin in the same place, but changed. And as we started doing more fin boxes in around 74, 75, then it was easier to interchange the fins. But it was amazing how when Dewey would take a rudder fin with a straight back and then put a curve into it, and the board would just change dramatically. When you do the same thing, it was like when you feel it, then you get it. And until people do that, you can take a perfectly good board, and with the wrong fin, the board will suck.
Yeah.
And yet you can have a board that's not really that good, and sometimes with the right fin, especially flex fins. Flex fins are unique because of the twang in the fin. It makes your board lively. Unlike a conventional fin, it's very positive feel, very stable, very directional. But when you get more into the flex aspect that we learned from Jeff Ho in 75, Jeff was amazing because we actually learned to flex keel fins, which was unheard of then.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy when you think about a fin. I don't want to say, we take them for granted because, obviously with the introduction of the fin box and all the fin systems, to your point, you could take a board that wasn't that great, change fins, it's a whole new board. But when you think about fin technology, you've probably seen so many fins change over the years, and you've probably seen some tried and true fins that just work as good today as they did yesterday. What do you think the biggest advances in surfboard fin technology have been since you've started?
Mm, that's a tough one because it's bizarre because we keep repeating history. In my 50 years, I'm probably coming around to cycle the third time. So it's like, if you would have asked me that 20 years ago, I would have said something else. But now here, it's ironic because a lot of the boards are almost like the boards of the 80s. And that's what inspired the beach break fin, because what happens is that a lot of people get stuck in the way, and maybe it's just the ease or of getting what they're getting, not thinking about it as being important. They just run a certain thing saying, oh, it's just a fin, not to worry about it. But then at the end of the day, I got really frustrated. And when I was modifying a fin for a guy, and I got done with that modification because the guy had a big fin, wanted to make it looser. And when I did that, I looked back and I said, wow, that looks like a Bertelsmann fin I did in 82, except I didn't like the tip because when I made this fin, it had a rounder tip. And I had Matt Calvani and Bing try it. He says, oh, Larry, I like the fin. And I go, what? That's not good, Matt. I don't liking is not good enough. Do you want to get some? He says, well, I don't know. And then I go, well, tell me what's the problem? And he goes, I just don't like the way it looks. So, oh, okay. So I said, all right, let me put a different tip on it to make it look a little sexier. And then, off to the races. So once you understand what the dynamics of a fin is in flex and in foil, because there's a blunt foil, there's a knife foil, there's a flat foil. If you once you understand all those things, you can make it look anyway.
Yeah.
And I learned that in windsurfing, because in windsurfing, I learned to make the fins more unique, because in the surf culture, the 70s and 80s were great. But once we start coming into the mid 80s and I met the windsurf industry, now you had the copycatters and people that had big money and started taking things. And then things started transitioning and changing. So my philosophy was that I'll make something. When I make something, I'll make it look unique. And if it looks unique and then someone copies you, they can't say, well, that was done in the 70s.
Right.
So as I learned that philosophy through the 90s and here into 2000, I separate myself from the other guys.
Yeah.
Because I don't like running with the pack. I like kind of running against the pack.
Well, it's, you know, it's either you're following or you're innovating, you know, and it's nice to innovate. But you made me think of something, because one of my questions was going to be is when you're talking about that beach break fin, how much does just cutting off a tip of a fin change the performance of the fin? But from what you just said, it sounds like once you know how the fin works with the water and the rail of the board and everything that you know it does, the way the water foils off of it, you can change that tip to look any way you want. It's
Well,
more about
yes and no.
the package.
Yes and no, because the tip was round. Now it's got kind of a hook and point. A round tip holds water and makes the fin delay.
Uh-huh.
That hook to a point, it doesn't have to be a needle point, but just a sharper point, is a quicker release. And now that fin is responsive quicker on your rail when you lean your body into it. And I learned that from two people. I learned that from Greg Pouch when I rode for McCoy, because he was real avid about that tip. Because if you sand that tip too round, we call it a dog ear. So it looks like a dog ear hanging on your, and those type of fins stick, which is like what your nose rider fins look like.
Yeah.
So there's a point of going too far, and little nuances like that. Bill Stewart was another one. Same thing. He has that hook that comes around to that point. And Sean Stussy the same way when I used to do Sean Stussy's fins.
Wow. That's crazy to think about how much technology, and I don't even know the word for it, but what goes into a fin, what makes fins work, what makes fins work together, you know, out of all the things that you've seen come out in the last 70, I got to do the math here real quick, 53 years of making fins, if I got that correct. What are you seeing now that excites you and inspires you?
Beach break, because it's something new and it's something that livelies up your board, and it's something that takes me back. Actually, even though it's new now, it the Bertlemann template from '82 is what inspired it. Because after I modified a fit, I seen that, I go, you know, that's the perfect. And then I went in that direction. You know, if I didn't spend time on the water, I had a guy ask me on Instagram, because I made a post about something. Sometimes I'll get a little bit cocky on my posts, and then guys will come back and get cocky with me. And the guy made the comment, "Do you surf?" And I laughed and I says, "Yeah, I surf, windsurf, and paddleboard."
Yeah.
Because surfing is one thing, but when I windsurfed, I learned actually the more dynamics of the fin at different water. There's viscosity of water. There is a dense, which changes density, which changes fins, and that changes your dynamics. And it doesn't really apply to surfing, because a lot of surfing usually is in salt water, which is buoyant water, versus stand-up and windsurfing that's in fresh water. Your fin dynamics change because the water density from being fresh versus salt. Fresh water is harder and denser water. You run smaller fins.
Wow, I never thought about that. Like when I surf here, because I live in Orange County, and when I go to, you know, I've taken trips to Hawaii, I've taken trips to Moorea, I run the same fins. Is
Yes.
that going to change them? The salt, the buoyancy?
Yep. And you know where that becomes more prevalent now is in wake surfing. So now the thing is, when you're surfing behind a boat, now comes the situation where if you're surfing a certain type of board with a certain fin at the beach, and now you're behind a boat, it's a complete different dynamic.
Oh, I never thought about that. So that would even go, and I've never done this. I've just had conversations lately about the rise of winging. If you're winging and you're using the wind and basically a kite to generate speed, your fin is going to work way different compared to if, well, I guess you're using a wake. No, guys are using foils on those, but still, that whatever type of fin system you're using is going to work completely different than if you're just foiling through pumping and using the wave to generate momentum.
Yeah, exactly. Because your water density plays them. And there's a guy that I'm with now that I just signed on for paddle boarding, probably the second fastest guy in the United States, and he's only 17.
Wow.
And he and I didn't think about this before, but it made sense. In the winter, it's a lot harder for him with lower numbers because the water's cold and the density is hard. As the water warms up, the density lightens up, your dynamics with your fins change, and then it changes your time. Because if you're pushing through hard water with a small fin, when the water softens up, you need to have a bigger fin to make up the difference of the density of the water to maintain that energy to get a faster speed.
Okay, so now my mind is going to be more spun than when I started because I thought I was pretty good. I'll admit I am not the greatest of fins. I've been running the same fins for quite some time. Um, so not only does the salt water affect the way your fins perform, but the temperature of the water. So if you're surfing one fin in tropical water and then you're going up the coast to Northern California and you're surfing cold water,
Yes.
is it going to be more of the flex in the fin, the shape of the fin, the material the fin's made out of? I mean, this
Yeah,
could
you'll actually, if you run certain fins and you go to Oregon, you'll snap your fin.
this could turn into a 3 hour conversation about how to dial your fins in. Now, are you going to say though, would your average person feel this, or is this going to be those elite guys that can feel
Oh,
it?
no, the problem here's the problem. The problem is the elite guys don't know. The elite guys just know how to acclimate to anything. There's certain guys like Kelly, they can ride a 2x4
Yeah.
and not know why, but they just do. But your average guy is actually more apt to pick up to those nuances because he can't acclimate as fast to compensate for the changes. So
Okay.
I actually like dealing with people that aren't really good because that's how you get your true indicator of things.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And one thing now that you got me thinking about, I worked at Ocean Earth a long time ago when we were down in Huntington and Costa Mesa, and we had a warm water leash. And it was a tropical leash because the same thing, cold water and
I
warm
was,
water.
I was a rep for Ocean and Earth in '74.
Wow. Wow, that was quite a while ago.
And
I
what
remember
happened is Rob Kaplan contacted me in '76, and that's when I became a Decline rep.
oh wow. So you got a long history of accessories and fins and all kinds of stuff.
And
Uh,
I was a stylized rep in from Bill Bringhurst in '78. That later Sean Thompson was the face for stylized sunglasses. Was actually I was the first sunglass to come into the surf shops in the '80s before right after Varney's.
wow. Well,
Every,
let's back up a second. Well, I got some time because I was just going to go into like different materials, like how we used to do with the leashes, but now you've kind of got my interest sparked in some other things. And to be honest, my brain might explode if I take too much more information on fins. What got you started in the surf industry and repping in the first place?
well, everything was an accident.
Yeah.
When the shop opened up 2 blocks from my house, a friend of mine told me when I just started surfing at 12, he says, "Hey, there's a shop that opened up down the street." So I went to the shop and I asked if I could sweep up the foam dust and do stuff around the shop. So $1.50 an hour. I was the kid that did all the grunt work, right? And so then 6 months into the thing, one of the guys, the older guys that was 18, didn't show up to work. And the guy in frustration says, "You know how to handle a jigsaw?" I says, "Yeah, no problem. I know a jigsaw." So he gave me a panel. At that time, we laminated on a door. The door was 4 by 8 feet. That was the laminating table.
Wow.
So we laminate the panel. We then cut the fins out of the jigsaw. So what happened was is that he scribed out the fins and says, "Okay, I got to go run some errands. I'll be back in a couple hours." Well, when I started cutting out the fins, I got done about like an hour and a half or so. So when he came back, I was having an RC Coke and moon pie sitting on the ground. He goes, ah, you had taking a break. I go, no, sir, I'm done. And he got all frantic. He goes, where's the fins? And I go, they're stacked right over there on the table. And he went over there and he looked at him. He looked at me, he looked at the fins, and he says, you know how long it takes my friend that's 18 to do these fins? And they look like crap because when you looked at the fins, they were stacked like a machine did them.
Mhm.
And I said, I don't know how long to take him. He took, said 4.5, 5 hours. And I go, wow. I go, why? But ever since I was 8, my dad used to buy boats and refurbish them. So my dad was always into the teak and the wooden boats.
Gotcha.
And so those were when I started scuba diving and snorkeling at 9. They used to
Wow.
clean the barnacles off the bottom of boats until the guy that ran the dock says you can't do other people's boats because the bottom cleaner says he doesn't want you under cleaning other boats.
Now, is that back then what you used to get a chain on the hole and take the barnacles off?
No, no, no. Actually, it was a scraper.
Wow.
That was it. We had a 29. Most of the boats that my dad had was in the neighborhood of 24 to 30 feet.
Wow. So you're making fins at the shop, and then
Anyway,
how did you get into repping?
I started making fins, and then at 14, I joined WSA. And when I joined WSA, my district was South Bay, PV, and Santa Monica. So as I surfed the contest, guys would say, and my name would get announced at San Pedro Surf and Sport, which is a shop. The guys would come up to me and say, hey, you're that Pedro guy that makes fins. I go, yeah, I'm that guy. One thing led to another, and then that's how I met Hap Jacobs. When I learned to drive, I met Hap Jacobs, I met Phil Becker and everything else at 16. And Wayne Mignata actually taught me to pinstripe at 16.
No way.
My board, I have a McCoy board that's hanging on the wall up there. And that board, it's got triple pinstripes that Wayne taught me. Because at 14, I then, the guy that one of the owners of the shop, which is Dennis Andrews, that shaped the boards, he says, hey, you want to learn how to shape a board? And I started planing a board and I hated foam dust. It smelled like dirty socks.
Oh man.
Two things I hated was the foam dust and polishing because both of them stunk like feet.
Oh man.
Because in those days we glossed and polished the fins until the mid 80s.
It's funny. My first job in the surf industry was actually profiling surfboards for Interface, which used to be a shaper, still shapes, but a guy in Huntington Beach in the 90s. And I remember just getting done and just having to airbrush all this foam off me, and which is funny because I had dreadlocks back then. I could never get all the foam dust out of my hair. And then I got into repping. It was a much cleaner job for me.
So then as I started going to more of the shops, then that's how I met Ocean and Earth.
Okay.
And then Rob Kaplan, because if I was in the shops already, I'd go up and down the coast. It was funny because I'd come up to Huntington Beach. I'd be coming down Main Street on one side with Robert August, Randy Lewis, and George's and Unity. And I'd be coming down one side. Glenn DeWitt from Rainbow would be going down the other side. And we'd walk over and switch. I had a 69 Econoline van that I worked at Jack in the Box in the evenings to make extra money. And when I got that van, it took me 4.5 hours to learn to drive it home at 3 a.m. after I got off my shift. So that's how I learned to drive a stick shift 3 on the column. So I would then go to Huntington, open my side doors of the van. Guys would pick out the fins that they want. And I'd go to the next shop and next shop and next shop. And as that getting around, that's how I had a rep in Florida named Bill Bringhurst. Mm-hmm. And Bill Bringhurst one day called me and says, hey, there's a sunglass company. How'd you like to make some quick money? And I said, sure. And he says, call up the guys in Burlingame in San Francisco and meet with them. And so when I went and met with them, then I became a sunglass rep. When I walked into the surf shop, there was only Varnays. Varnays were like $90 to $100. I came in with the same sunglass, the cat glass and everything else for 30. I made so much money the first year that after I surfed one day in Manhattan Beach, I was coming down the street. I drove into Vassapolak and I wound up with the BMW I paid cash for.
And that was stylized, correct?
Yeah. 1981 on my 21st birthday, I paid for the sunglasses, paid for a 320i.
Yeah. Now, did you take on any other brands after that, or did you decide to kind of peel back at the
Oh
fins.
yeah, I did stylized for 2 years until then Bucci and SunCloud start coming in, and stylized wouldn't help me with advertising. I actually paid at that time. Action Sports was a magazine. I actually paid for small ads to try to keep it going, and then coming into the third year, that was it, and I just moved on to something else. But I
Gotcha.
was also at that time doing Decine because that was in late 70s. Decine was in 76. Ocean and Earth was 74.
Gotcha.
And then there were other things, 1982, I was the importer for the Shane Horan Starfin. So that's why I met Shane Horan. And it was funny because I just seen Shane Saturday. I hadn't seen Shane until the 80s. And I says, Shane, you still look the same except without the Goldilocks hair. Because he had white hair, and that's when he was with Ben and Lexan, which was the guy that molded the fin.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, we're getting down to, I got about 5 minutes left. And the reason why is Revolutions don't make much money. So they use the free Zoom to do their interviews. But I do want to ask you, as the surf industry has changed over the last 50 years and where we're headed now, I mean, if you got any advice for the industry or for the retailers, what would that be?
Don't lie. Because that's
100%.
the problem. The problem in the industry is that people sound like used car salesmen, and usually when they say something and then the person tries it, it doesn't act like they're told it act, and it's frustration sets in. When frustration sets in, you kill the growth of the sport because the person thinks that one, this is too hard, or they're frustrated, or they just have too many bad experiences. They move on.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's funny. I've said several years over my career, if more people were honest, uh, things would go a lot smoother. It's like you said, it's when you get caught lying, or maybe sometimes a rep doesn't know, and the rep's telling them the truth, but then the brand goes another direction, and you
Now
know,
the reps are told what they're told so that they make money, and that's the problem. A good rep will not be a used car salesman because the sunglasses is a perfect example. I made so much money the first year is because there was no competition. It was overpriced. Varney sunglass was you're paying for a brand. It was the same glass, the same factory,
yeah,
even. And leashes is the same way. There was the and Decine was a good leash. I really liked Decine. They had good products, but there
yeah,
were a lot of leashes, and that people had distinguished the difference. Just like there's a lot of boards, but and there's bad shapers, there's good shapers. But at the end of the day, it's the same now. Everybody now seems that they want to be a fin company. What they do is you come to them with the design, they send it off, get it copied with a different name on it, and they're paying the guy, and then that makes them a fin company. It says, no, that's not how it works.
yeah, yeah. There's not that many people that can craft, like you said, that are actually crafting and innovating. Anybody can steal a design and send it off to a company, have them make it, but you're not a fin designer at that point. You're not
Well,
a,
and that's part of the frustration because a lot of people, let's face it, image and brand has a certain things. That's why people like to buy a Rusty. That's why they like to buy a Channel Island because there's that image attached to it. And if that's tarnished, it's like a guy would sure like to have a Porsche versus a Kia. So it's the same thing. So either you are or you aren't. And I think that's learned by respect. And the guys. That's one thing a lot of people after the 90s, the second generation, like Greg Martz, his son, and Steve Mangelli, his son, their work ethics is a little bit different than their dad's work ethics and translates to the finished product to the board because they came into the market when the market was in stress mode, which is when the Chinese came in the mid 90s when the Surfer magazines then says, okay, now we got to legitimize this because we're getting paid big bucks from Surf Tech and everything. So we got to make it look good for those guys. And then that's when the whole market went to shit.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
when
there was a big shift then.
there was 20 years, like Rob Machado said about 10 years ago, Rob Machado himself said, the last 2 decades, the surf industry stood still. It went nowhere because it's survival mode.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, people aren't innovating right now; they're surviving. I'm hoping to see more. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of young brands come out now, which is exciting. But I can't wait to see what the future holds and
Yeah,
what.
there's good, and it's good you say that because guys like I'm pretty impressed with guys like Almond. Almond, those guys, young guns, they know the history almost better than the guys that made the history. It blows my mind. Those guys are one of those rare young groups because and I'm blessed to know Matt Calvani when he was a ding repair guy for Becker. I mean, he's another guy that's came up in the ranks and he's a powerful individual for his age.
Yeah, it is nice to see those people that study the past, learn it, and then innovate, keep going. The guys at Almond, they're all great guys. I love going by the shop, saying hi to those guys because they just got a cool vibe. Well, speaking of cool vibes, I got 1 minute left. I don't want you to be cut off. I do want to tell you, I thank you so much for not only all you've done for the surf industry, all that you do, and all that you'll do in the future. Thank you for spending a little time with us here on Welcome to the Surf Industry. We appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure. Enjoy following you guys.
Talk to you later, brother.